Hello there, and welcome to the Second Life Book Club. My name is Draxtor Dupre. We are again at our special venue this week, created by Solus, although our show today has nothing to do with fantasy, but rather with terrifying horror that is maybe a little bit too real. And the horror started with George R. Romero, at least in the popular culture. And it ended, or maybe it's not ending, with our guest, New York Times bestselling author Daniel Kraus, who I will introduce in just a minute. A couple of housekeeping notes. So most of you know this. The Book Club Island is, of course, open 24/7. We meet here every Wednesday at 12 o'clock for the main show. There are other monthly shows all on the calendar. If you click on the board behind me, we stream live on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube to a combined audience now of over 3,000, which for a book lover like me, and I'm sure you guys in the audience, is really heaven. So people do read, we know that, or at least they watch people talk about books. Now, if you're watching this and you have not read anything lately, we do not discriminate against lapsed readers. So if the last novel you read was assigned to you back in high school, you can come on in. We're listed in the destination guide, so you might see a bunch of newbies here. If you're a seasoned Second Life resident, please befriend them, be nice to them, recommend some books. Join the group, suggest a show idea by sending me an email or IM. We're now booked through June 2021, but you can always suggest authors. Maybe I can juggle around with the calendar a little bit. I put out a reading list on bookshop.org every week. You can click on the books around here and it shoots you to the website. Big thanks to our team, Strawberry Linden in charge of camera and streaming. Brett helps out with security marketing. Patch Linden, the whole governance team, including the moles. Marianne McCann customized the venue. Solus built this specific venue. Kralos dresses up the avatars. And big thanks to Silas Merlin, who makes super special avatars and custom swag. AJ made a zombie mug that you can see on the table here. Grab one. I don't know what's in it, maybe blood. And yeah, that's it. So today's guest is sitting here next to me. It's Daniel Kraus, New York Times bestselling author of many books, all on the table, almost all on the table here, and splattered around the floor as well. Books for adults, speculative fiction, horror, middle grade, collaborations with Guillermo del Toro on Troll Hunters and The Shape of Water. Today he is here because on Obama's birthday and my dad's birthday, he released a 650-page book entitled The Living Dead. It's also on the table. I just finished it, and I have to say this is amazing, Daniel. Welcome to Second Life. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. This is cool.
This is really amazing. And you know what? I was not aware of this project, and then my wife saw something on Boing Boing. God bless Boing Boing. And I could not believe that I have never heard of this project. And I contacted your publisher, and you came in on this date. So, I mean, this is really the zombie saga to end all zombies sagas. I mean, there's action, gore. There's deep philosophical ruminations about life and death, all the social critique. You fleshed out this book based on a draft by George A. Romero, who passed away in 2017. Now, I don't want to assume that everybody knows who George A. Romero is in my audience. I would be disappointed if a lot of people didn't know it. But who was George A. Romero?
Right. So George A. Romero was the inventor of what we consider to be the zombie. So in 1968, he made a movie called Night of the Living Dead, which I'm sure you've at least heard of, if not seen. And that was it. So anytime you see a zombie in popular culture, it traces back to this film. And in the movie, he never even called them zombies. He called them ghouls. And then when he made a sequel called Dawn of the Dead, which is also very well known, in the 70s, that's the first time he applied the word zombies. Although I think people had started referring to the ghouls in Night of the Living Dead as zombies before he made Dawn of the Dead. So, yeah, and then he went on to have a long 50-year career as one of the greatest horror film directors of all time. And he was my personal hero, and then he died in 2017.
I actually bring up this book here. It's called Zombie. It's the German novelization of Dawn of the Dead, which I have in my bookshelf here at home in the physical realm. I'm bringing it up here, floating in the air, making it a little bit bigger. Dawn of the Dead was how I started discovering, and then I went backwards to Night of the Living Dead. It's obviously I don't know if it's a thinly veiled look at racism and all sorts of social problems of the time that are still with us, unfortunately, maybe stronger than ever. When you first discovered George A. Romero, were you aware of this, or when was this? When you discovered him, because I mean, a lot of people say, well, I came for the gore or the splatter, and then I stayed for the social critique.
Yeah, I mean, I discovered him very young, so I was 5 or 6 years old. So
Your parents should really have a
yeah.
visit from Child Protective Services.
Well, it could have gone very poorly, but it went quite well, because they're such smart films, from a smart filmmaker, and so I think it really set me up. So as I continued to grow up watching his movies, they guided me as a person, certainly, and then later as an artist. So yeah, I mean, I came to George extremely young, so I wouldn't have caught all of the other layers of import and meaning that his works are filled with. To me, it was just a scary movie that wasn't that scary, because if it had been that scary, I would have ran from the room at 5 or 6. But my mom was a big fan, and she would kind of yell at the characters on screen and laugh at their foibles, and that made it feel safe to me. It probably wasn't until I got a little bit older, in fact, that the real horror of it sunk in, particularly the end of the film, which I mean, it's so well known, but I guess I'll try not to spoil it. But it's one of the most famous.
No, I think you totally can. I mean,
Okay.
these films have been in the public
Yeah.
sphere, and they're so iconic. If you have not seen them, and you feel Daniel spoiled it, you can still. I mean, this is a journey. These films are such an important journey, especially today. No, no, no. Go ahead. Dawn of the Dead. They're in the. Set it up for us, please. Yeah.
Well, I was setting up Night of the Living Dead,
Oh,
which
yes,
was
please. The
the
film, I think, is also in the public domain. I'm not sure.
yes.
You can probably get it on YouTube, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can. There's sort of two ways to look at that. It sort of famously or infamously, it when the movie came out, they forgot to put the little copyright symbol on it, and believe it or not, back then that was enough to make it instantly public domain. It was a huge blunder.
Oh my God.
So George Romero made almost nothing off that movie.
That's incredible.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he would have been a very rich man. Instead, he was not at all. So it was always on. It was always on TV because it was public domain. So the downside was that he made no money. The upside was that it was screened constantly in drive-ins and movie theaters on TV, and it became very famous. So he did benefit from that, the fact that it was so easily available.
Now, what's the film about?
Okay, so Night of the Living Dead is simplicity itself. It's a group of strangers who all are out doing their business, and the dead start coming back to life. And so we sort of enter the story right in the middle of it. There's someone's visiting a grave in a cemetery and is attacked by a zombie, and she runs to this sort of isolated farmhouse. And eventually, we meet what I think is 5 or 6 characters. They're strangers to each other, and they start, boarding up the house against these zombies, and start destroying themselves from inside. What the message of Night of the Living Dead is, and what would become the overriding message of Romero's career, was that the zombies were really just a catalyst. They could have been anything. He happened to invent the zombie, but it could have been anything. The fact is that he wanted to draw attention to whatever the crisis was. The people couldn't work, if the people didn't work together, we're all going to lose. And that would
Mm.
continue to be the theme, especially in his zombie films, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, and onward.
That makes my the big question, of course, not obsolete, but and I'll weave it back in because, of course, now when I read your book and the times of this pandemic, I was looking at the questions I was going to ask was like, did you how does it feel that it comes out now with the pandemic? But in essence, the core of the work and the core of the message of Romero's message, as you say, is that humanity will lose and will self-destruct if they don't find a way to work as a whole, as a society, rather than this rugged individual BS.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it doesn't even make a difference that the book comes out now. I mean, it's more timely than ever, but it's almost. I mean, the way you, and we're going to get into the details of how you constructed
Yeah.
your story. But yeah, go ahead.
That's just a great observation. It does seem especially timely now, but that was the power of his observation, is that it was always timely, and that this was a perennial problem in culture, and specifically American culture. He thought,
Mhm.
and I also agree.
Did he really? Did he is he on the record saying that this he feels is a specific American problem? I mean, as much as a fan I am of the films, I don't know much about his life.
I don't know if he ever stated it so explicitly, but it's certainly my interpretation of
Yeah.
his work. And when he did interviews, he generally tended to come down hardest on what he saw as, well, typically American leaders.
Right.
So he was, he died really before Trump could do much except get elected. But certainly when George W. Bush was president, the Dennis Hopper character in Land of the Dead is
Yeah.
directly based on George Bush.
And we should say there's a bunch more than just the original trilogy. And I actually have it also here on the table. If the camera could zoom in, I put it here. Where is it? My son actually went with grandpa. He went to a flea market in Germany, and then he got me this 11 euro 95 3 DVDs, drei Filme in einer Box, Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, and Day of the Dead in one DVD box. There is quite a few more films that Romero did within the zombie realm, right, Daniel?
Yeah,
What,
the
how many?
original trilogy is considered. I mean, they're all considered just stone cold classics: Night, Dawn, and Day. And then after he'd make a zombie film every decade, and the idea there was that he would have something to say. He would have a sense of what the biggest issue of the day was. He missed a decade in there because of essentially just things going on in his life, working in Hollywood, trying to finally make these giant epics that he wanted to make, and just having an extremely frustrating time of it.
Yeah.
But then he picked back up with Land of the Dead and followed that up with Diary of the Dead and Survival of the Dead, which was his last film overall.
I think I saw Land of the Dead in the theater even.
Yeah,
I don't
that was
remember
that would have been the first of his um, zombie films that I would have been able to see first run in a theater.
Yeah. And that's very, very much where neoliberalism is trying to push us towards. Here I
Right.
said it. I'm sure we'll get some interesting feedback in the text, but now we're 15 minutes into the show with Daniel Kraus. His book, The Living Dead, just came out. If you're just tuning in, this is a book that is based on George A. Romero's draft, and we're going to get into um, how this came about, how much George is in there, how much Daniel is in there. We're just talking about George's work now. I want to move to the book because the book is not a it's not I mean, there is no real canon here. You started a fresh story from start to finish that is set post 9/11. We don't really know when it is exactly. It's not that relevant, but I think the post 9/11 is somewhat relevant. The characters are all brand new. They're incredibly detailed. They include an autistic government worker who survives, locked up. She locked herself up and trying to create an archive of what's happening around her. There's a sexual predator army chaplain who becomes a cult leader. One plot line takes place in a cable news studio and really nails it in terms of culpability of commercial media. In regards
Yeah.
to coursing the dialogue, I love that. I mean, I love everything, but that is you really nailed that. How commercial media sort of keeps the general public on edge and docile at the same time. There's a lot of gore in there. There's incredible. Uh, well, it's the zombies are taking over. The violence is fleshed out. No pun intended. I said this earlier. I cried several times. I'm not ashamed to admit it when the medical examiner flees the morgue with his colleague and they settle together. But then he gets bitten by his own mother, and that's the end of that. There's such heartbreaking visuals in there. So I don't know what the question is. How long did it take you to flesh out that core story and those characters? What's the scope of this is massive.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate your comments. Romero's interest certainly was never zombies per se. He really backed into that. He didn't mean to create a cultural icon. He wanted to tell stories about people. People having trouble collaborating, essentially. And he wanted to work in every genre possible. I've seen his archives, and it's just filled with dozens, if not hundreds, of scripts and treatments of all genres. But horror was sort of where his career landed him, and so he had to use horror and more specifically zombies to tell the stories he wanted to tell. So he had to be very creative, use those metaphorically to tell his stories. How long did it take? I mean, the whole process, probably 3
Hold
years.
on, Daniel, before we
Yeah.
go in there, because now I really want to know, because I hear my mother in my head. She would say, well, yeah, that's all fine and good, but why does it have to be so violent? And that's a discussion I had with my parents. Is when I got into horror, they say, I tried to convince them, say, this is all like dealing with real issues. And they go like, yeah, that's interesting, but why do they always have to show the gore here? I could ask you the same question. Does it not distract from the message?
Yeah, I mean, people were asking George that way back in the 1960s. Night of the Living Dead sort of broke new ground in gore. It was black and white, but you had scenes of zombies ripping people open and eating their entrails. It was pretty intense and was often cut out of earlier versions of the film. So yeah, but it's a larger question just about horror in general. Why would anyone want to see something disturbing? Well, the point is to wake us up. That's the point of a lot of art in general, is to dislodge us from our comfort, so that we're not what you said before about TV audiences. We're not docile, so that we have to pay attention. And there are many ways to do that. You can do it through humor, and action, whatever. One genre was horror, and Romero was a master practitioner of it. He grew up as a 60s radical, really. He was brought up, or he came of age during a time when Vietnam War footage was on TV. He wanted, he was young when he made Linden, of the Living Dead. He wanted the establishment to take notice and to say that we aren't, we've seen blood and guts. This is part of our daily existence. So he, and then also there's just the brashness of youth, where it's like we're gonna do whatever we want, and we're gonna shock people. And I'm sure there was some of that too.
But you do the same in the book, and that's another question for later on. What do you, are there specific challenges to describe that on the page vis-a-vis in the visual medium? But I just realized that, I'm a big fan of Jodorowsky, especially Santa Sangre. I don't know if people know him, Jodorowsky, but he also uses violence in almost as a religious metaphor in a way. I mean, you go on in your book for pages upon pages, and I mean, this is not a critique. I'm gushing over the how much I like the book, and I really think that you got the balance quite right between those scenes, and then the larger big picture social critique and all that. And I believe this book would not have worked if you would have cut those scenes out, the scenes of complete violence and mayhem. Um, I'm just wondering if, yeah, I don't know. I mean, this would.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question that I hardly ever get because it's so basic in the best of ways. It's like why is this okay to show these kind of things?
Well, why is it? The question is, why is it necessary? And I could answer that question myself, because you were going there with, war is brutal, and societies try to shield the war from the general population at home so that they can keep living behind their white picket fences. That's the ground that Romero broke, and you keep doing that. And I think that's fantastic. But I got to tell you, as the older I get, I can't watch these modern horror films anymore, because the horror is. Uh, I mean, it is all around us now. And
Yeah.
your book brought me back to actually appreciating. I mean, from a prose level too, the way you describe it, it's very artistic. I mean, it's really good.
Yeah,
So I don't know.
one of the things that I like to do in my own books is, I, it's a hallmark just of everything I've done is to write beautifully about terrible things,
Mhm.
and a lot of times that takes the form of finding, gorgeousness in the grotesque. I think it's I like the tension between those two things. I like that feeling of something just awful, but on the page you can make it beautiful, and
Yeah.
then you have to sort of deal with that. Like what is that? How does that make you feel when there's something that's both things at once? Romero was he most of the deep depictions of violence are actually probably from me rather than George.
Hmm.
He wrote, in the manuscript he left behind, he wrote, good zombie action, but his interest really wasn't there. It wasn't that, even in his films, he would add the gore stuff sort of as a something that he knew the audience would want,
Hmm.
and it added a certain flair and a certain pop. But in his manuscript, he really the book really came to life when he was writing about people and situations and their backstories. So a lot of the fleshing out, as you put it, of the gore did fall to me, and I think honestly, as strange as that sounds, I'm more interested in gore as a tool than George was really.
Hmm. So does that mean you feel it's more important than you think that he felt, as a tool to move it
I
along,
mean,
or to just bring you more into? I mean, again, as you're saying, especially the scene with, I mean, this is just one out of so many, where one of the main characters gets bitten by his own mother. I mean, there's a lot of symbolism in all these things. It's a very religious
yeah.
symbolism that happens here when people get torn apart, or the news anchor who is so reliant on his good looks, and then they get destroyed. But
Yeah,
there's
I mean,
many others. Yeah.
I think George was interested, and I'm definitely interested in the relationship between our body and our sense of selves.
Hmm.
So anytime, and I think that's why I love the subgenre of body horror so much. I love playing with that concept of the revolt of our own bodies, and in some ways, becoming a zombie is the ultimate revolt. We are giving up our entire corporal selves to be absorbed by this other thing, to become part of a virus, if you want to put it that way. Although I
Hmm.
don't think George and I in this book, we don't really put it that way. Like that's sort of what it looks like from above, but when you really get into it, it's less of a virus, less of a pandemic, and more of an uprising, really.
Hmm. Do we want to read something? It's the bottom of the hour. If you're just tuning in, this is the Second Life Book Club with Daniel Kraus, author of The Living Dead, his latest among many books, which I eventually will read in my OCD condition when it comes to reading. Big shout out to Boing Boing who put this book on my radar, and big shout out to my wife who reads Boing Boing and sends me interesting articles. George, are you
Sure.
ready? George, see, I refer to you as George now. You have become him. You never met him, right?
No, I met him once, but it was socially. His manager knew that I was a huge devotee of his and invited me to have drinks with him and George. But it was entirely social. Had nothing to do with the eventual creation of this book over a decade later.
Mm-hmm. We'll get into how it came about. If I would ask you kindly to do the most difficult thing that is to do here in Second Life, which is to go to the front of the stage and not fall into the audience.
Well, we'll see.
Here's a book, and I can adjust this book for you. We have a bunch of comments also here. Dova says there are many different subgenres of horror. Not every horror subgenre has to be very gory to be scary. Yep, some like to include it to add to the horror. Every person is free and open to their interpretation. And Nexo said, in the first weeks I joined Second Life, I was a zombie in real life too, because I was at the screen 24 hours. Well,
I think I'm where I'm supposed to. I think I'm where I'm
Yes.
supposed to be. Yes.
Yeah, it looks great. I think I'll bring it down a little bit here. Yeah, perfect. And what are you going to read for us? Please do set it up.
Okay, so the book is delivered in 3 acts, and that's based on an opera, actually, that George loved called Tales of Hoffmann. He was obsessed with this opera, and so I used it because I didn't have George. I tried to read and watch and listen to the things that he loved, to see if I could be inspired by them too, and thereby be able to become one with George.
Mm-hmm.
So this is from the second act. The second act of the book is by far the shortest. It basically, the first act takes you the first 2 weeks of the zombie uprising, and then the second act jumps 15 years. It covers the 15 years in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
George's
It's the
movies.
birth of death, the life of death, which is Act 2, and then Act 3 is the death of death. And let me just throw in there for our nerds out here, E.T.A. Hoffmann was actually born very close to where my grandmother was born, which is now Poland, close to Lithuania. He was, I think, regarded as one of the first horror writers. He was lived from 1776 to 1822, but I'll put it in the reading list. Sorry to interrupt, Daniel. Go ahead.
No problem. So this is from the second section, which moves relatively quickly through those years. So this is not a section that's very character based. It's sort of from the perspective of the autistic government worker that Drax mentioned. So she's been holed up in this government building for years, and for various reasons, the landline is still working. So people will occasionally call her and tell her their stories, and she's taken upon herself to create the archive of the new world based on everyone's calls. So I'm going to read from that. I haven't read this part out loud before, I don't think, so I will probably run across words that I can't pronounce because I do that all the time. I write better than I read. And
Let me
go ahead.
Let me add one piece of information. The government worker, Ada Hoffman, is very interesting wordplay here. Let's see if the people get it. She, as you said, she is very focused, and when the zombie plague breaks out, she locks herself up, and she eventually starts eating also maggots and insects, but she survives, and she puts out and I don't know if this is in your setup, then I give it away, but the internet is still working, and some websites are still working, so she actually puts a call out on the websites with a number for people to call if they're still alive.
Yeah, that's basically it. Yeah. Yeah, you haven't spoiled anything. I'm going to pick up after that.
Okay.
And stop me if you need to stop me. I'm not sure how long this bit is, so just butt in if it's time to stop.
We're totally good for time. Go ahead.
Okay, here we go. I'll interject if we come across something that needs explanation. All right, we're going to start off with some swear words here. Year fucking 6. Multiple callers in quivering voices referred to it this way. Everything changed in year fucking 6. Etta Hoffman had begun to think people were getting their legs under them. The calls in year 5 had bolstered this assumption. No one sounded optimistic, but no longer did they sound shattered. She detected the grim fortitude she used to hear from retirement-age coworkers who'd seen it all. Shit happens. You move on. End of story. But the story was just getting going. Naturally, she took note of it the first time she heard it. She even marked a page in the binder with a neon pink adhesive note. On that day, 2297, 1805, a man named Mike, a prosaic name for a fellow whose words would be writ large in history, spun his yarns well past Hoffman's strictly held quitting time of 6 o'clock. She was peeved and impatient, nearly enough to miss a detail so startling she went off script to ask a question. You just said, did you say the zombie was a champ? A champ? Mike scoffed. I did not say that. Did you say it was a chump? The zombie was neither a champ nor a chump, or a chomp for that matter. Mike sighed in irritation. The zombie was a chimp. From this asinine interplay, Hoffman first learned of the development that would, she believed, end any attempt by humanity to take back the world. Mike was calling from a sheriff's station northwest of Memphis, where he and 2 others, while scrounging suburban streets, had come across a pair of chimpanzees outside a Long John Silver's. A chimp sighting by itself was not implausible. Animals left to starve in zoos had started breaking out as early as 10 days after 1023, and exotic animals had taken up residence and multiplied in public parks, city streets, and shopping centers that now seemed designed specifically for their pleasure. Hoffman had fielded 3 corroborating accounts that elephants were doing especially well, those able descendants of the La Brea woolly mammoths. Camels in Chicago, lions in Indianapolis, zebras in Seattle, all thriving. Chimps in Memphis? Not so strange. Mike agreed until his party saw the simians loping toward them. That was concerning. Rabies had mushroomed since 1023. In a vacuum of vaccinations, every mammal was a potential threat, from cats and dogs to rabbits and foxes. The chimps were rabid refugees from the Memphis Zoo, Mike suspected. It was only when the chimps got closer that Mike realized they were dead. Their black fur was purple and shining with hardened blood. Their bowels hung loose and they were missing segments of their groins, armpits, and necks. When Mike and his friends waved their weapons, the chimps did not flinch. Their white eyes rolled, and they kept coming on feet and knuckles, moving together as if following the same command. When one's lips peeled back from its crooked yellow fangs, so did the others. We had to brain the zombie apes the same way we do zombie people, Mike said. Turn from chimps to chumps, I guess you could say. Hoffman consulted her lending library. In year fucking 6, she'd do that a lot. A well-thumbed medical reference from the desk of a hypochondriac statistician explained the theory of simian immunodeficiency virus, how it infected people who ate chimpanzee meat before mutating into HIV. There was therefore a precedent for sharing a virus with this species. While disturbing, it did not seem disastrous. Zombie chimps might cause trouble in the Congo or wherever else chimps lived in the wild, but the world's zoo population could wreak but limited havoc. 2 months later, Hoffman received an overnight phone message alleging zombie rats. A young woman calling from someplace where there was a deafening metallic echo begged for help. Through shrieks and sobs, she said her brother had killed a bunch of rats, same as every day, Except this batch, before he could bag them, wiggled back onto their tiny clawed feet and charged, grappling up legs, leaping to chests, knotting themselves in hair. Her whole family was in different stages of pale-skinned, dark-socketed zombie bite death. And it wasn't fair. They made it all the way to year fucking 6. Hoffman believed the notion of a rat that would not stay dead might cause the most hardened renegades to go fetal. Though she had no particular fear of rodents, the news felt like the breaching of a castle's walls. Zombie chimps? That made some sense. Zombie rats? She did not need a lab coat to understand some bigger barrier had been broken. Literal barriers would need to be rethought as well. Determined survivors could build obstructions large enough to keep out two-legged zombies. Could they also build them finely enough to keep out little scurriers? Back to the lending library. A book on great disasters, a chapter on plagues. New York City alone houses 2 million rats. Paris, 6 million. London, 7 million. Hoffman recalled a bit of water cooler chat, one staffer bemoaning pest problems, the other citing a supposed truism. No one was ever more than 6 feet from the nearest rat. We just let ourselves forget it, that's all. There would be no more forgetting. Not for Hoffman either. Calls she received about zombie rats were not localized. Utah, Wisconsin, South Carolina. The switch on rats had been pulled everywhere, and she had no reason to doubt the next rat that died, where she was, would not decompose in civilized silence. It would roll back over, sniff her out, and hunt her down, its tiny red eyes gone white. No more slippers. Hoffman started wearing the tallest boots she could rustle up in her size, which happened to be the most stylish items she'd ever put on her body. Red leather, chunky heels, laces all the way up to her knees. Hoffman sharpened the end of a broom and carried it everywhere, including to bed. No more sleeping on the break room sofa. She moved the cushions onto a break room table, then slathered the table legs in Crisco to make them too slippery for rodent feet. As a final safeguard, she coated the room's perimeter with flour each night, so she'd know in the morning if any little toes, zombie or not, had come tramping. Sleep no longer was a sure thing. One night, she looked around the moonlit break room, absorbing the absurdity of her bedtime routine. She tried to imagine the defenses others out there had devised. She imagined metal bars being inserted into plastic housings, daily caulkings, small gauge wire. Right before she drifted off, she gasped back awake. What she was imagining were cages, the kind meant for hamsters, gerbils, chinchillas, guinea pigs, and yes, rats. Only people were locking themselves inside. Yet another trip to the lending library. This one on a hunch, in the middle of the night. She sat on a stool, her habit now to keep her booted legs free from zombie rat surprise, and browsed. Someone in the building had owned a trove of self-help and inspirational books, including one on being kind. Hoffman, dismissive of rote politeness, had nearly chucked it. But the book had a chapter on empathy, and when her gaze settled on a list of the most empathetic animals, she felt a lonely, echoing sorrow for what the world had become. In the top spot, humans. In the second spot, chimps and orangutans. In the third spot, rats. The chapter included plenty of unfollowable specifics. The roles of the neocortex, right supramarginal gyrus, tempoparietal junction. But the bigger stuff she understood. When a rat was trapped, its fellow rats attempted to free it. They would save it morsels of food. If the rat was freed, it was affectionately nuzzled. Females out-empathized males, no surprise there, but all rats exhibited pro-social behavior once attributed solely to primates. Hoffman shelved the book. What it suggested about the zombie disease was too cruel, and she didn't want to memorize the exact order of the animals on the list. She didn't think she could know the precise shape of the horror to come and still lift herself from her spike-legged, flower-encircled table bed each morning. not without paging to the suicide entry in the archive index and wondering what it would look like with another page reference after it. Just one more. It was rare for her to bury her head, but she knew why this one hurt. She'd always felt a kinship with animals. That was different from loving animals. She'd never wanted a pet. But she recalled spending school recesses, alone on the playground, staring into the woods behind the chain-link fence, knowing she shared more with steady, watchful squirrels, rabbits, and birds than she did the screeching, frenetic, unpredictable grade school monsters behind her. Teachers, school psychologists, and even fellow classmates, once they had the vocabulary, liked to explain to Etta Hoffman that she lacked empathy. She never believed it. She had empathy, the same way animals had it, hidden from the loud, grabbing, demanding world, experienced in her own private ways. Losing animals to undeath hurt more to her than losing people, because the only thing that was certain about the zombie plague was that animals were not to blame for it.
And that's Daniel Kraus reading from The Living Dead. Daniel, this is fantastic. And I'm so glad you actually read this part, because this was a big thing for me, this whole empathy, quote unquote, angle. But it really suggest here, and Etta Hoffman, as she says, is just shocked by this, that the zombie plague is afflicting people more if they have empathy.
Yeah, I mean, the idea there was, if you watch Romero's 6 zombie films, there are no zombie animals, and so there might be a question when readers first encounter this, if they're big Romero fans. But my research turned up that he was pretty obsessed with the idea in the last few years of his life. He mentioned it in many interviews, commentary tracks, and so forth. And I dug up other sort of side evidence, comic books he had written, and so forth, that he was fascinated by the idea. And most tellingly, in Land of the Dead, there was a zombie rat scene that got cut out. And in that scene, a big realization for me was that the zombie rats weren't attacking living rats.
Mm-hmm.
The zombie rats were attacking people. So that means that the zombie thing, whatever it is not cannibalistic. It's anti-human.
Mm-hmm.
So once you open that can of worms and you realize, okay, every kind of zombie activity out there is after human beings specifically, then you have to ask, okay, why? Why do Romero zombies want to wipe the world of humans? And that directed a lot of Act 2 and Act 3 of the book.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely brilliant. Please take a seat, if you will. And I want to invite the audience. We have 15 minutes left here on the show. Type any questions that you like. I'm also monitoring Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and of course here in World. But it also suggests that the empathy that humans. I mean, what does it mean for humans? Does it mean that that humans are too empathetic, or not enough?
Well, it's
the self-destruction, because again, if I were sort of a very, let's say, a successful member of the neoliberal elite, and I would buy into this individualism, I would say, empathy is all fine and good, but it's not really good for business. We can't afford it.
I think in this case, it's a matter of eliminating the people in the most efficient way possible. And part of that is breaking down their spirit. And so you start at the most empathetic. The next on the list, which is the section I just stopped before reading, is dogs. Dogs are the next to go, and that is a huge psychological blow, because the people who are the survivors out there have really counted on their dogs, as beloved companions and protectors, and using their sight and smell to help them. So really, it's a matter of breaking people down, and just another just on the way of erasing people from the planet because of what the people have done to the planet. And
Mhm.
the zombie plague is the wrong way to look at it. It's the human plague,
Mhm.
and the zombies are the planet's natural antibodies that have come to reset the planet.
When you discover this in George A. Romero's work, and you're tasked with I mean we didn't even get into the amount of time that you needed to recover when you got the call to get the gig.
Hmm.
How was that? Did you faint or drank
No,
for
I
a week?
didn't. I mean, it was stunning. Certainly, George was my favorite artist. Period, in any medium. So it was pretty overwhelming, but I just my method of dealing with it was just getting to work as quickly as possible, so that I didn't have to think about the responsibility element of it.
And break the tasks down. But then you
Yeah,
found this tidbit of a tidbit is this morsel that then becomes so important that animals
yeah,
um, are in there. So is that for? I mean, this is I usually like also to ask a little bit about the craft. Is that something in the process of putting it together, the outline? Is that a big breakthrough when you find something that you can
yeah,
for the bigger picture?
yeah. There were probably a number of those in this book. Generally,
Yep.
you might have one or two big breakthroughs in a book. With a book this size and complexity, there were more than usual, but that was certainly one of the biggest ones.
But also
The
because he apparently had thought about that, you know.
Yeah, it really felt like something that he wanted to develop and didn't get to. So
Mhm.
that made it all the more fascinating for me and pressing and urgent for me, really, to be able to work it into this final work. And the book is sort of the end, of his 50-year zombie saga.
Who knows? Maybe they ask you to write another one, and then it's this is another big question, of course. How long can you milk a franchise before it gets shallow? I mean, that's an issue with television more, which you
Well,
also a form you also work in. Yeah.
Well, it was never a big issue for Romero zombie movies because he made them so infrequently. He would
Mhm.
generally make one a decade, and so it would never. He never was interested in running it into the ground. He was like, I would make a movie, and then I'm going to wait 10 years or so until I have something else to say.
Mhm.
And as you alluded to before, there were no characters that carried over from one movie to the other. Each sort of took place in the same kind of world where the zombies were the same type of creatures, but all characters were reset brand new with every chapter. So it was not something the world sort of drove zombies into the ground, but
Oh,
he
that's what
never
I
did.
mean because exactly. But this is, I mean, this book of yours is also made in conjunction. I mean, you got, as I understand it, the gig directly from the George A. Romero Foundation. So I do hope that they can control this, how this is being,
Oh yeah,
dealt with. But yeah, you're absolutely right. In popular culture, we tend to, I mean, we or they, capital they, are
yeah,
trying to destroy, milk it until it destroys itself. It's almost zombifying the zombie mythos.
yeah. It
Partially.
is
Another big idea that's in there is the one that I noted down here of not fighting back. There's one
interesting.
character that symbolizes that. Yeah, it's. I felt that was a big one.
Re-
And I mean, I, anyways, no, go
Well,
ahead
I'm just
before
gonna
I go on
say,
the full tangent.
Drax, I've done a ton of interviews, and I think you're the first person to pick up on that. So
It's because I was
congratulations.
born in Germany, and we get drilled down, and it's also a personal
Well,
interest of mine. Militarism, and when I moved to the U.S. and
yeah,
learned, and now I'm sort of a hobby historian, if you will, about the U.S. interference in the world, and that was I think it's a super important theme that gets discussed and thrown around in with all these characters, and they all grapple with this issue.
Generally, an author doesn't have a lot of say on what a book cover is, but in this case, I did. And on the back of the book, there's a big slogan that says, "Will you rise up or will you walk away?" And I wanted that to be on the book on purpose, because when you hear a slogan like that, it sounds very kind of macho in a way. Yeah, we're all going to rise up. But here's the thing. It's a double-edged question, because there is a thread through this book where Romero believed that one of America's biggest problems was they didn't know how to walk away from a fight. So there is a thread in here about having courage enough to walk away. So it's in some instances, of course, you rise up. He was. In the zombies case, they are rising up, and Romero is behind them. The zombies represent an underclass that's been battered down, and they're staging a coup against a rotten ruling class. So in that sense, he's all behind the rising up, but he's all, Romero's sympathy ultimately is with the zombies. But for the humans, they need to learn to walk away.
It's really brilliant. I love that, and you don't shy away from that complexity, and it's a fantastic book. We're going towards the top of the hour. Folks, get this book, The Living Dead. It's remarkable, and especially the timeliness of walking away. I mean, you can interpret it in so many different ways. Walk away or rise up. I mean, you can see pressure on the streets today that we haven't seen since the 60s. What is the role of that relationship of people who are in the streets and people who are not in the streets, for example? That also played in my head when I read this. Can the zombies be extinguished by a bunch of hippies singing John Lennon to the zombies? Imagine. That is really not what this is about at all. So we're closing in on the top of the hour. Folks can put questions in the chat, and as I usually end with is, and we have another 30 minutes with Daniel, and people are welcome to use voice. This is an SL only. If the region is full, folks can try to get back in. Actually, here I'm scrolling through my run sheet. I have one more question about the craft, because we were talking about sort of the ubiquitous zombie. The zombie is ubiquitous in all media. How do you approach this nagging? I mean, at least I suffer from this sometimes, but I developed a method to calm down these thoughts of originality and the balance between knowing what's going on outside, but also not being too influenced by it.
Yeah, it's great.
Were you concerned about this? I mean, The Walking Dead, if you ask any kid today, they don't know who George Romero is, but everybody's seen The Walking Dead.
Yeah. It's a great question. One of the reasons, from what I understand, that the Romero estate wanted me to work on this book is that I had a deep understanding of Romero, and that means Romero in every facet. Like, he made a lot of movies that weren't zombies, and I was a scholar of those as well. My obsession was not zombies. They could have gotten any number of people who had written zombies books to take this on, but that wasn't, zombies were not my obsession, and they weren't George's by any means. He was, in some ways, he was cornered by zombies in a sort of metaphorical way. He had to make zombie movies. It was his only choice. So I took on the book, certainly having probably better than average knowledge of zombie things, but not being a zombie fanatic. I was a Romero fanatic. So a lot of the zombie media out there, a lot of the older stuff I of course have seen, but a lot of the newer stuff I haven't. I've seen very little of The Walking Dead, and then the other things, even ones that are really good that I can tell are good, like 28 Days Later or something like that, that I can identify as a good film. It still doesn't do much for me. So
that
I
is so
was
interesting. You're totally speaking my mind. I would have. This is so well put. I'm going to quote you on this because when you can appreciate the craft, you can appreciate what the team put in there, and it still does not connect. And then you go deeper and you go like, why does this not connect? Because the people behind it are pretty good. They all know what they're doing, and it's still just that it doesn't carry that connection, that punch. Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't mean it's not good. It's just not for me. And so if anyone else today were to write a zombie book, they would probably do the obvious sensible thing. They'd try to come up with a new angle on it, my zombies fly or whatever, they'd come up with something. But Romero had no interest in any of that. He invented the zombie. He's not going to he's not interested in anyone's frills they add to it. So it was sort of easy not to be influenced by other things that were happening. I just looked at what I knew about Romero. I just looked at his zombie films, back to basics. It's the normal kind of zombie doesn't run. It's not after brains. I just went back to the classic metaphor that he had been using all his life and just stuck to it.
Awesome. And we'll wrap the show here. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you for watching. I didn't even mention my zombie boots that I'm wearing. Nobody mentioned those. It's very sad. The most magnificent zombie boots. Thank you, Daniel, for coming. Fantastic. Good luck with this wonderful book. I just got another message actually here offline. I invited a friend of mine, and she said, "Oh, thanks for inviting, but I'm really not interested in zombies." So I mean,
Yeah.
it goes the other way, right? Because it leaves people, you can't get them through the door because they are just, I'm not interested in zombies. So it could go both ways.
Yeah, I would say to that person that Romero only had limited interest in zombies, so she's all right. She
Yeah.
can still enjoy the book.
People also have to watch Martin, of course, and go deep into Romero's works. What are you guys reading? Please put it in the chat. I'll put it in the reading list. I'm reading Larry Niven. Larry Niven is coming to the Second Life Book Club on September 2nd. Yes, it's the real Larry Niven. That's his avatar name. You can befriend him. He is amazing. He's 82 years old, and we did a Second Life onboarding, and he was just getting it right away. It was fantastic. So he's coming September 2nd. Next week, we have Ken Liu. Ken Liu just got a deal, I think, with AMC for an animated show about his Hidden Girl anthology. And oops, where am I on my run sheet? I apologize. I need to sit over here. Here we go. Thanks again to the team, Strawberry Bread, Patch, The Mole, Silas, Merlin, Krayla, Solus, for this wonderful special castle. Next week, we're going to be in the space station because Ken is here. Please tell everybody that I mentioned and your friends how much you love the book club. Thank you, my wonderful audience. readinglistbookshop.org/shop/Draxtor Reads, but you just click on the books here and then you will get the link. That's it. See you all next Wednesday at 12 o'clock, Second Life time, right here at the Second Life Book Club.